This week on Jerusalem Dateline, Israel's prime minister warns again about a nuclear Iran, while U.S. Senator Lindsey Graham says Christianity in the Middle East is in peril. Plus, a revealing interview with a former Muslim girl who recounts her escape from Islam. And a look back at Israel's history through the lens of one photojournalist who witnessed the birth of the Jewish state and its rise into a modern nation. All this and more this week on Jerusalem Dateline. Hello and welcome to this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. I'm Chris Mitchell. We're coming to you this week from our Jerusalem studio. The Islamic radicals from ISIS have unleashed a brutal wave of suicide attacks in Iraq. Well, critics are asking, does the Obama administration know what it's doing? Does it have a strategy to defeat ISIS? So far, ISIS has taken over key cities in both Iraq and Syria, while the White House is still trying to come up with a way to stop the deadly terrorists. Gary Lane has that story.
Iraqi Prime Minister al-Abadi is confident Iraqi troops can liberate the strategic city of Ramadi from the Islamic State.
Can I assure you we can bring it back soon. I'm talking about days now.
But a number of U.S. officials and strategists are questioning Iraq's will and the Obama administration's commitment to defeat ISIS. As they did in Mosul last summer, Iraqi troops fled Ramadi when Islamic State fighters overran the city. That led to harsh criticism from U.S. Defense Secretary Ashton Carter.
The Iraqi forces just showed no will to fight. They were not outnumbered. In fact, they vastly outnumbered the opposing force, and yet they failed to fight.
But many analysts are asking who really lacks the will to confront ISIS, the Iraq Army or the Obama administration? The head of Iran's elite Quds Force of the Revolutionary Guard, General Qasem Soleimani, put the blame on the United States, suggesting that the U.S. formed a coalition and hasn't done a thing to defeat ISIS. He said America doesn't have the will to confront them. And now a growing number of military strategists, both inside and outside the Pentagon, are questioning the president's approach of fighting ISIS with only limited U.S. airstrikes. According to the Washington Times, one Defense Department counterterrorism official asked, "What strategy? We are now floating along, reacting to ISIS." Others question the administration's rules of engagement for the airstrikes. One former Pentagon official told the Times that combat pilots can linger over targets for hours before approval comes to strike. And there's reportedly growing concern about the U.S. not getting advanced weapons to the Kurdish Peshmerga fighters. It's one Iraqi force willing to fight with proven success on the battlefield. But critics say the U.S. isn't doing enough to support them. And even though ISIS has made numerous gains in recent weeks, not only in Iraq, but also in Syria, the White House still claims its policy against ISIS is working. And the Iraqi government's wide-scale operation to defeat ISIS in Ramadi was well received at the White House.
I think that is a clear indication of the will of the Iraqi security forces to fight. And the United States and our coalition partners will stand with them as they do so.
But how firmly they stand and whether it will be enough to defeat ISIS in Iraq and Syria will be apparent in the days and weeks ahead. Gary Lane, CBN News.
Republican U.S. Senator Lindsey Graham met with Netanyahu this week and addressed the foreign media about his alarm not just over Iran's nuclear program, but about its conventional weapons program.
I learned something that was very disturbing. The dimensions of the Iranian conventional weapons program seems to have grown exponentially. I was briefed about advancements in weapons on the conventional side during the last couple of years that would give Iran a capability that would be dangerous, not just to the region, but to the world.
Graham also warned about the plight of Christians in the Middle East.
I've never seen more threats to the Christian community than I see today. We're about to destroy one of the most ancient religious groups in the Mideast. I am incredibly worried that the rise of ISIL could be the end of Christianity as we know it in the Mideast.
Gary Lane spoke with Terry Law, founder of World Compassion, about the situation in the Middle East.
I talked to the head of a battalion of Christians, Assyrian Christians who've been chased out of Mosul and have formed an army of about 3,000 men, and they are there to protect their own people. And the Peshmerga feel the same thing about Kurdistan. You're absolutely right.
Is that a good idea, Terry? Do you think Christians should arm themselves?
I don't see that they have any options. They have been attacked. They are not the aggressor. They've been chased out of their homes. I talked to the Archbishop of the Syriac Orthodox Church, who described to me what it was like the night that ISIS came in to Mosul in the month of June last year, and how they went house to house. He said, I asked him, how many of your people recanted? Because when ISIS came to the homes, they demanded that they choose between Allah and Muhammad or their Christian faith. I said, how many of your people recanted? He said, maybe 6 who had were had mental problems anyway. But I said, what happened to the others? He said, some of them were beheaded on their doorstep. And, as a traditional evangelical, and Gary, I think you'll understand this, we've always thought of the Catholics or the Orthodox as, another faith, and just how real is their faith. My opinion is this. If someone will stand in the doorway of their home and say to ISIS, I will not recant on my faith, and they are killed, in my mind, they are martyrs, and I will meet them in heaven one day.
Amen. And what about Ramadi? Christians there? Anything you can tell us about them?
The Ramadi Christians are underground, deep underground, simply because of the fact that there's no latitude with ISIS at all. I think the Christians were the first ones to get out in terms of my information. And they, in getting out, it's always difficult to find a place for them to go, especially if Baghdad will not open up. As you know, there are churches in Baghdad, etc., and I'm sure that the believers leaving Ramadi are very open or hoping that the Christians in Baghdad will accept them.
Okay, Dr. Terry Law, I know you've been involved for a long time there. World Compassion is doing excellent work in Iraq, and we always appreciate you joining us. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Gary. Appreciate it.
The Islamic radicals of ISIS are dangerous, but a nuclear Iran would be far worse. That's the warning from Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. He told Louisiana Republican Senator Bill Cassidy that, quote, as horrific as ISIS is, once Iran, the preeminent terrorist state of our time, acquires nuclear weapons, it will be 100 times more dangerous, 1,000 times more dangerous and more destructive than ISIS. President Obama, working with other countries, has been trying to reach an agreement with Iran over its nuclear program. But Netanyahu has been warning that it would be a bad deal and give Iran a path to nuclear weapons. Coming up, she made headlines when she ran away from home, fearing her father would kill her for becoming a Christian. Now Rivka Barry tells her story in her own words. Welcome back. The woman in our next story was living in America when she began to fear for her life due to religious persecution. You may remember the story of Rivka Barry. In 2009, she was a teenager who ran away from home to escape her Muslim father and fought several court battles to remain free. Wendy Griffith talked to her about her story, told in a new book.
When Rivka Barry was 16, her Muslim parents found out she had renounced Islam and become a Christian. That's when Rivka ran away from home and took refuge with Christians in Florida she had met on Facebook. Rivka had heard stories of so-called honor killings for those who renounce Islam, and she feared that if she returned home, her father would try to kill her.
This is not just some threat. This is reality. This is truth.
Today, the 22-year-old college student tells her remarkable story in a new book, Hiding in the Light: Why I Risked Everything to Leave Islam and Follow Jesus. And Rivka Berry joins us now. And Rivka, this is such an honor to finally get to meet you in person.
It's great to be here.
But let's talk a little bit about your childhood. You were raised in a very strict Muslim household, and you were a devout Muslim from a very young age.
That's right. At the tender age of 3, the imam would come over to my house and spend hours teaching me the Quran. I fasted, the full 30 days of Ramadan, starting at age 6 with no water. I prayed 5 times a day. For hours I would memorize the Quran, and I was committed to my faith.
Well, there were 2 things that happened in your childhood that really changed everything and changed the way your family treated you, especially what was your father. What were those 2 things?
That's right. So the first one was that my eye became blinded by an accident with my brother. We were playing with a toy airplane, and he accidentally threw it in my way. And then the other was...
How old were you when that happened?
I was 6.
Just 6.
Yes. And the same year, I was sexually violated by an extended family member.
And then what happened?
So we moved in order to retain that honor.
To the United States.
That's right. And my family uses the eye treatment as one of the factors of us moving, but really underneath it was about...
retaining honor. Wow.
Yes.
How did you come to faith in Jesus?
As I got older, I saw the emptiness of Islam. I saw that it took and it took and it took, but it never gave. There was a girl that had the courage and the bravery to step beyond the social boundaries of middle school, and she asked me to come to church with her.
Wow.
And what she didn't realize was that months prior to her asking me to come, I got on my knees after beating, and I did the despicable. I was at the end of myself. I was considering suicide. I was just done.
You said after beating, so even though you were a devout Muslim and doing everything you could to please your family, your father was beating you.
Yes, he was. And it's the culture. It's not seen as something odd. And so I got on my knees and I said, God, if you are real, show me who you are. If you're Allah, if you're Buddha, if you're Jesus, I just want to know truth, and I'll give my life to it. And after that prayer, Angela came months later, and my life transformed through that experience at church.
Your father at that point gave you an ultimatum.
He said that if you do not turn back, there are the consequence was death.
You were preparing to die at that. I mean, you were what, 16?
16.
And so you didn't really have a way of escape at that moment, but then God provided a way of escape.
He did, through a set of miraculous and crazy events. This lady at 2 a.m. in the morning while this is happening, I'm ready to die. Like, I'm ready to just face it. She messages me, and I feel this powerful feeling of I need to reach out to her. Wow. And so I call her, and that's what I ask her is, I tell her for a second my story, and I say, will you pray that in the face of death that I do not deny Jesus?
You're now 22, you're a college student, we can't say where. Do you still fear for your life?
I've come to the conclusion that my life is not my own. And when it's time, but at the same time, I do take precautions to be wise.
So there's still that whole issue of, you shamed the family now in the ultimate way.
I have, by writing about it. Ultimately, my message is one of hope. Like, my message through my story is to show other people that there is restoration and healing, and absolutely there's a safety element, but I just so hope that people are inspired to love God with everything they have.
Rivka, it is such a pleasure, and we're so glad to see you.
much.
So joyful and so beautiful, and thank you for your book. It's truly an amazing story. The book is called Hiding in the Light, and it's available online or wherever books are sold. Rivka, God bless you.
Bless you. Thank you, Wendy.
Up next, they call her Mama Maggie, the Christian woman who's giving her life to help Cairo's most vulnerable children escape a lifetime of poverty and despair. Welcome back. Bible translation is thriving around the world despite many challenges. A new report by the United Bible Society shows that in 2014, more than 1 billion people gained access to the Bible for the first time. 51 new Bible translations launched last year in languages spoken by more than 1.3 billion people, including 1.2 billion Chinese speakers and 146 million speakers of other languages. Despite the persecution of Christians in Nigeria by Boko Haram, the Nigerian Bible Society launched 4 new Bible translations, And in Liberia, the nation hardest hit by Ebola, 2 new translations were launched in languages spoken by nearly 1 million people. In recent years, Egyptian Christians and Muslims alike have suffered at the hands of Islamic extremists, but many testify that the light of Jesus shines in the lowliest of places. One Egyptian woman picked up her cross and left an affluent life to bring hope to impoverished children surrounded by garbage. Gary Lane brings us the story from Cairo, Egypt.
Picking through tons of trash each day, sorting out recyclables. For the many Christians living in Cairo's garbage slums, it's the only life they know.
Many of them had a lot of discrimination and persecution in the rural areas, and when they've migrated into the city, there was no place really to live except in the trash for many of them that were poor, mostly driven by the bad economy, but in part by the discrimination for jobs. They decided to sift through the trash. It's the most efficient recycling operation in the world.
And those who visit these Cairo neighborhoods will see garbage everywhere, in the streets, and even piled inside the homes of the Zebelin, the garbage people. Many children here do not attend school. They spend their days picking through the garbage to help their families earn a few dollars per day. It's a hopeless existence, but one Christian's goal is to give them love today and a future tomorrow. Mama Maggie, as she is known, hopes to give them a chance at life. Marty Macari is the co-author of a new book about Mama Maggie's work. A Johns Hopkins hospital surgeon, Macari traveled to Cairo to learn more about the ministry.
Unlike Mother Teresa, who essentially came from poverty and took a vow for poverty, Mama Maggie came from wealth, and during an encounter when she was a successful marketing executive, connected with a child in the garbage slums, a famous district of Cairo that's been mostly neglected.
She found joy and happiness there and returned over time. She eventually gave up her marketing career and started a ministry called Stephen's Children. Today, 500 full-time staff members and hundreds of volunteers serve more than 30,000 children every day. The kids forego some of their garbage picking for several hours of fun and education.
Now, Mama Maggie's ministry has more than 90 of these community centers throughout Egypt. And children like these come here not only to learn reading and writing and arithmetic and also values, but how to dream big.
Well, many times when the kids are asked, what do you want to do when you grow up, they've never really thought that far in advance. And some of the kids, can you believe, have never been called by their name by anyone, but no one's ever valued them and asked them that question.
One girl said she only dreamed of having a piece of tomato to eat. Another child said his dream came true at a Stephen's Children camp. He actually slept in a bed. But dreaming big means learning a skill. Mama Maggie's ministry teaches the children a trade like shoe and clothing manufacturing, marketable skills for earning money and serving others, whether in the garbage slums or elsewhere.
They're not talking about getting out of the garbage district, they're talking about serving the garbage district. And sure enough, a good number of the full-time staff were kids in the ministry themselves, have graduated and want to give back. I've met doctors that work in the clinics over there, and they're working for almost no money.
7 of the 21 Egyptian Christians killed by ISIS in Libya last February were helped by Mama Maggie's ministry.
They were kids that she fed and taught and were part of the group, and 2 of them had become leaders in the ministry, and they're now using that story to teach forgiveness in the Middle East. They're teaching the kids to break the cycle of revenge.
What impresses you the most about Mama Maggie?
Well, I think it's the humility. It is amazing to see that sort of genuine selflessness in a world where you so rarely see it. You know, Gary, when I came back, the thought of being upset at the cab driver or frustrated with the bank ATM or something like it just put everything in life in perspective.
A perspective of serving and helping, bringing hope and dignity to the most neglected places. Gary Lane, CBN News, Cairo, Egypt.
Up next, one photojournalist chronicles the history of Israel and the people who led the nation from its birth to its place among the nations. The State of Israel was born in 1948 and recently celebrated its 67th anniversary. Few people have witnessed the country grow from humble beginnings into a modern state. But one man has not only witnessed, but also chronicled that history with his camera. Here's this classic story, one of my favorites, about one man's remarkable life. Israeli photojournalist David Rubinger tells his story and Israel's in a book called Israel Through My Lens, like the day in 1947 when the UN voted for the establishment of a Jewish state.
People were dancing in the street. The young kids, on the morrow of the UN decision to establish the State of Israel, climbed aboard a British armored car with the British police numbers on it and the British driver, and with a hand-painted flag.
He began as a freelance cameraman and later worked for years as time-lapse photographer. He showed Israel's first years, its fight for independence, and the joy of Jews returning to the Promised Land from all over the world.
The idealism, the feeling, the striving for equality, social justice, ashamed not to work.
During his career, he's photographed nearly all of Israel's leaders, from Jerusalem's legendary mayor Teddy Kollek to its future Prime Minister Shimon Peres, Prime Minister Golda Meir at the Knesset and in her kitchen, Yitzhak Rabin and his wife Leah having breakfast, and of course, Israel's first Prime Minister, David Ben-Gurion.
His face was something. I have it on the cover of one of my books. It's like granite, strong like a rock.
He's covered Israel's triumphs, capturing the jubilation after the successful raid on Entebbe. He showed Israel's suffering through its many wars.
One of my dearest pictures is one taken in Aswan in 1980. Very, very intimate pose between two leaders after 4 wars. And such intimacy.
But Rubinger's most famous photograph came during the 1967 Six-Day War. For the first time in nearly 2,500 years, Israeli paratroopers captured Jerusalem's Old City and the famous Western Wall. The paratroopers came to the wall, and Rubinger was there.
In order to get any little bit of perspective, I wanted to shoot from below, and I was lying on the ground and shooting, and these three soldiers just walked by. I got 3 frames, nearly identical.
Years later, Rubinger photographed those same 3 paratroopers back at the Western Wall. The men and their country have grown up. The story of Israel is remarkable and one of the miracles of our time. Well, that's it for this edition. I'm Chris Mitchell. We'll see you next time on Jerusalem Dateline.